It's over. It's over.
Hey guys, it's another Sunday, and not really a whole lot happened this week. We get some more seething about Iran, but other than that, other than this guy, roping. And actually, I did want to talk a little bit about this guy. There's not much I couldn't squeeze it into a whole stream, but I had like the exact opposite reaction of everybody else on the right wingosphere, because obviously he was a DEI academic, this Jason Arday guy, and it was very tragic. He, like, if you actually read the stuff that he claimed in his biography, hang on, I'm going to turn up my volume a little bit here. There we go. If you hear some of the claims he made in his biography, they were completely absurd. Like running marathons on a broken leg. He was muted age 3 or whatever. I was actually rooting for him to win and to get away with this just because it was so absurd, right? And actually, I had war gamed a strategy for him to win. which I'll talk about later. But let me just check out the comments first to begin with, because I did have some requests about doing a video where I talk about how the economy systemically disprivileges men. That is something else I wanted to talk about. It wasn't really a story point, so I'm probably going to introduce it after I talk about a few of the stories, because there's 3 of them that I want to talk about, of course. There's the Jason Arday that I just started with. Then there's another one where it's about a woman who murdered her 3 children after an alleged psychotic episode, and all the women jumping in to try and prove that she was innocent and her husband did it. That's another crazy one. And then there's another story, a more recent one, of surrogacy, and it's more like you can see the internal logic of feminism. You know, I'm not too concerned about feminism personally, because it's like, what's the point of even arguing about feminism if, like, feminism is an issue economically, but it's like getting into arguments about what women are doing with their bodies or whatever. It's like, how does this even apply to me if I'm not, like, fucking or marrying or impregnating these women anyways? Like, I really don't care about issues like, I mean, I do kind of care about divorce law, I suppose, in the abstract, but I don't feel personally stung by it, because it's like, I'm never getting married anyways, right? So how is it even relevant to me? Ironically, if we made divorce more difficult, it would probably make marriage even harder for guys like us to get into in the first place. It's kind of like with how promiscuity is not the right word, how liberal sexual norms affect dating, where if we lived in a trad society where women were basically like socially consigned to only have one partner their whole lives, this would actually raise their standards even higher for men. Whereas, you know, sometimes I have seen cases where guys will squeak by because women have relatively lower standards due to less expectations in the long term, where it's like, he doesn't have to be literally perfect, because if I don't like him down the line, I can switch him out for someone else. That sort of thing. It's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because we think of traditionalism as benefiting us. In some ways it would. I mean, it would depend on the kind of traditionalism, right? But in other ways, that's really not the case. But that's just me rambling. Let me read some of the comments here. Mercer's about to start streaming. He had to just kick his GF out. My GF is a hairy 5-fingered hand, okay? Or I guess 4 fingers and a thumb. That's my GF. Time for the shit demographics pill. Demographics targeted against dinkies. I mean, that's stuff I've talked about for ages. I mean, it was literally my first video, right? The problem is there's only so much you can say. You know, it's like, once I explain how it works, you either get it or you don't. I had this one case with a guy on my Discord server who he was interacting with a woman on TikTok, arguing with her in a comment section, I think, or something like that. And he tried to explain the demographics, like the problem with young single men, the inverted marriage squeeze that's happening, that I described in my demographics video. And she just could not understand it. She just couldn't get it. It just went completely over her head. And it was almost like a pointless exchange. And if you can't explain that and they can't understand it, everything that's downstream of that is completely irrelevant, because you can't explain that either. You know? So what are you supposed to do? It almost feels like, it kind of reminds me of how I have to, when I'm in real life, and whether I'm at the workplace or whatever, and I actually do like the guys I work with, but it's like, I can't relate to them on any level beyond extremely surface, you know, because we occupy different universes. Like if I were to try and explain even some of the stuff that goes on in my head, I would have to, in order for him to understand where I'm at now, I would have to explain the superstructure of my belief system, like where I see the system coming from, and then I have to explain how I derive this system from the fundamentals. Like it would literally be like hours-long lectures just to try and explain, like, this is why we view reality so much more differently from you. And it creates this impassable gap between normies and us. And it's like, for women, I think it's even worse for women, because it's the gap is not only there, but it's also women already have psychological resistance against ideas and structural explanations that are antagonistic towards them in any way, or that, you know, the conclusion, the resolution to the problem, to the system, would involve something that would impact them negatively, right? So, for example, female-only immigration to balance out the singles, that would negatively impact them. So you already are bumping up against psychological resistance, and then you try and explain it and just refuse to get it. But look, I love talking about it, but it's just, they just don't care. They're just not interested, and they're not interested in understanding, and even if they were, they struggle with it. Like even guys in our sphere that I talk to, they kind of struggle with the concept. I hate wage slaving. Houses were $20K while the boomers dreamt of being millionaires. Now you have to be a millionaire to buy a house, not even a mortgage. You know what's funny about that? I saw I was watching The Based Camp, which is like this married couple with 6 kids, and they're like libtards turned conservatives, but they're super materialistic and analytic in their thinking. So they sort of think like a I heckin' love science libtard, but they're actually right wing. So they don't have any of the taboos around stuff like race or stuff like sex differences. And so I was watching a video on how they were talking about the DSA will eventually take over the Democratic Party in the USA, which is correct. And they were talking about how they were comparing like what baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z considered to be materially successful. So basically like wealthy, or maybe wealthy is not the right word, but like solidly upper middle class. And you saw from baby boomers, they reported an income of $90,000 would be considered upper middle class. And that's probably true for at the time that they were in the workforce, right? So like 70s and 80s, probably that was the case. Gen X said $200,000. And remember, Gen X hit their 20s in the 90s. So that gives you an idea of where they're coming from, 90s to 2000s. Millennials said $180,000 a year. Interestingly, it went down a little bit for millennials. So you can see that there's a plateau here in some ways. And then Gen Z said something like over $500,000. It's this enormous gap in their perception of what is wealthy. And of course, $500,000 is far, far harder to achieve than, say, $200,000. And, you know, a lot of people, like the conclusion that the Based Camp video came to, and the one that you saw a lot of other millennials come to, is that, oh, these Zoomers are they're unrealistic. They're just, they're looking too much at social media or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not so sure about that, actually. I think what's happened is a lot of older millennials, they've lost sensitivity. They're starting to fall behind culturally in a lot of areas. And they've missed how massive the impact of money printing has been, particularly when it comes to inflating assets. Because there were a lot of millennials that got into housing before COVID. And that's really the big divide between millennials is if you were able to get into the housing market before COVID. And a lot of older millennials did. And so their houses have ballooned in value since then. But the money that they're making hasn't increased that substantially in terms of their income. But their assets are enormously expensive now. But because they bought it before COVID-19, it's irrelevant because the asset has just been sitting there appreciating in value. For Zoomers that are coming in after COVID that are looking to buy into the property market, that is in fact what you see. And as a matter of fact, like this is, in some ways, this is what Canada is like right now. Like this was a survey that was based on the U.S., but this applies strongly to Canada in terms of income. Like, you basically have to make something like that. Maybe not quite that high, but you'd have to be making, like, I think there was research on this that a top 10% income earner, or like household income earner in Canada, could not qualify for a median house loan in Canada. For a loan for a median house, their income was not high enough to justify it, to qualify for it. Like, that's how insane it is. And the U.S., I think, is gradually coming to reflect that as well. And so I think that's actually what it's reflecting, more so than Zoomers just being too, like just paying, consuming too many unnecessary services and goods. Now, I'm sure that plays a role a little bit as well, but I think for the most part, it's an accurate perception. Medican, how is everyone coping? I'm coping pretty well. Actually, I didn't get much sleep yesterday, so I'm not as coping as well as I could be. Cope maxing. You can still buy a house in the boonies. You can't do that up here. The houses in the boonies are almost as expensive. Like, the only places that are really cheap here are places that are basically full of drug addicts and prostitutes and stuff that are just a complete dumpster. Where you, like, the whole purpose of buying a house is to have a stable living location to raise a family in. And if the area that you're buying the house in is full of crackheads, you don't want to raise children in that. So that greatly brings down the value of the house, right? Boomers have attempted to disenfranchise their offspring as far back as in the 1900s. Yeah, I did see a post about somebody found the stuff on the Mormons and how the Mormons, especially some of the sects that separated from the mainstream branch of Mormonism, they still practice polygamy, and they basically have to drive out the younger men because there's not enough women to go around. The context of the post was like, this is what boomers do when they're given, like, when you liberate them from the constraints of monogamy. And there is truth to that. It wasn't that extreme in, like, Islamic societies because of the restriction of having 4 wives. So Muslims cannot have more than 4 wives. And but for the Mormons, there is no restriction on that. So they could have as many wives. And I think the leaders of the separatist Mormon sects had, like, it was absurd numbers. It was like dozens or like tens of wives. Like, it's absurd. And yeah, you end up with all these young men getting driven out. And first of all, this creates a group of young men that are not only disenfranchised from your community, but potentially hostile to it because they've been ostracized from their own community. And then on top of that, you have a relatively limited supply of young men who will be willing to defend your community and their interests relative to older men who may be less capable of it, you know? So it creates a structural weakness. But because of the nature of the United States, this is a point I've been hammering home on the United States. Because of the geographic nature of the United States, they don't have to worry so much about that. Like, they only have to worry about internal problems. They'll never be threatened by an external group. Like, they cannot be invaded by an outsider because no country that is large enough to threaten them is anywhere near their borders, right? It's a very unique position, and it makes them uniquely dangerous because they can promote extremely depraved ways of living and then project that onto the rest of the world. And they can tolerate the negative consequences of that for far longer than the peoples that they impose those ways of living onto, right? Like, America can tolerate an enormous amount of degeneracy, right? As a matter of fact, they can basically treat the American population as access to requirements. You know, I think the billionaire class in America would be quite happy if half the population was addicted to fentanyl, addicted to OxyContin, whatever, like any kind of opiate drugs, and then just killing themselves with opiates. I think that the billionaire class would be quite content with that. because they see most of the American population as access to requirements, right? No other country could do that. Like Russia could not do that. China could not do that. Europe could not do that because they would just be invaded by their neighbors that want their resources and their land, right? That's the unique difference with America. So it makes America uniquely bad. And it's why I've shifted over to the point where I'd like to see the radical left win in America, purely because they would be actually destructive. They would destroy the country. And then this would like free the rest of the world from the horrors that America can impose on the rest of us, right? From their unique vantage point. Hopefully Tails and Barry STFO. I mean, Tails is fine, but I'm not going to be... Look, I'm done with getting into like an hour-long argument. Like, if that happens again, I'm just going to have to kick them from the chat. And I don't like banning people from my chats, but I will, like, I'm not going to ban anyone, but I am going to kick them from a live stream's chat, and then they'll have to wait until the next one. Like, that's usually how I do it, and I'll do it again, right? Because it absorbs too much energy. I don't mind debating things, but it's got to be outside of these kind of channels. Rehab Room mentioned Cognita job market is terrible in his last video. Yeah, he's 100% right. This is what happens when you import biomass, right? Biomass wants to, like the third world populations, mostly in India, but also elsewhere. They live in these miserable, horrible conditions, and they want to exit to other countries. But then they bring that, this is sort of the tragedy with these Indians, is every country that they have access to, they immediately swarm it and destroy it and recreate the same conditions that they fled from. Simply because once a country becomes available for Indians to claw their way into, they will do it en masse by the millions and then destroy the country, right? And it's just because of the sheer size of their population. It's not even like they're wicked people. It's just what happens when you have a population that huge, right? Rehab Room has to pretend whites live on easy mode, but even has to say it's getting tough in the workplace. Yeah, no, that's absolutely not true at all. It depends on what he means by easy mode, because he's talking about us in our own countries. I mean, you can't... Okay, if you're comparing us to third worlders in third world countries, okay, the colonialism thing only had currency for a certain period of time. After it's almost 100 years after colonialism, and we can compare countries that were previously colonized and are successful now to countries that have remained unsuccessful, we can conclude that it's not because of colonialism that these countries are unsuccessful. And we can also compare them to their own history. Be like, well, this is just the way that this is the way the people in these countries have lived for pretty much their entire life, their entire existence, going back into history. Right? Really, the main difference between Europe, it's not like Europe has always had a super high standard of living, and the Middle East and Africa and whatever have always had a very low standard of living. It's that by the 1500s, Europe had, you started to see the two groups, Europe, Asia, and Middle East. You started to see them separate in terms of living standards at that point. And then Europe just kept going up and up and up. That's the main difference, okay? So... first of all, I think comparing us to other populations and what they produce is not a fair comparison, because this isn't apples to apples. All right. And then what that means is that the only comparison they can make is within our own countries, at which point it would be like me going to China and saying, wow, the Chinese, it's really way easier for the Chinese to live in China than it is for me to live in China, because look at all these things that, look at all these jobs where you have to be fluent in Chinese. And, I've been discriminated against because I'm not ethnically Chinese for this job or that job. It's like, yeah, that's because it's China. Like, what do you expect? We should expect that people treat like people prioritize their own population ahead of foreigners, and that shouldn't be something that we whine about, right? This one thing that I've found rather annoying is that kind of whinging. But yeah, anyways, and well, the difference is as well is that we have active discrimination against us. Okay, as white men, we have active employment discrimination against us. Okay, we're at the bottom of the pile when it comes to employment discrimination. Okay, it doesn't mean that we're the victims in every situation, but it means that in this particular condition, we are absolutely the victims. Now, I will say, and this is something that this is a point I did want to make, is that affirmative action by race, while it is important in terms of causing negative outcomes for white men, I would actually say sex-based affirmative action is far, far worse across the board. Because, like, consider this. Blacks in the U.S. make up, I think, 12% of the U.S. population? If we only had affirmative action for black men relative to white men, let's say that they get like a 30% boost in being chosen for employment with the equal credentials over white men, just because they were like 12% of the total population, that would actually not have that substantial of an impact on the employability of white men, right? It would not. And it did not, which is why we didn't see DEI starting to become a serious problem until the 90s and later. It's when women moved in, because women, and it's not even that like women are worse in some way, it's that they make up 50% of the population. And when you're discriminating in favor of 50% of the population, and then on top of that, you also include racial minority groups of other men. So you're talking about, at that point then, you're starting to talk about like what, 60, 70% of the total population being discriminated in favor of, and what is it, like 25, 30% of the population being discriminated against in favor of the rest of the population, then it becomes a problem. That's when it becomes a severe problem. If we were to eliminate affirmative action for women altogether, and it was only men that benefited from it, I actually think that it would not become as nearly salient a political issue. It would still become an issue because it's still unfair ultimately in terms of discriminating for reasons outside of competency. But it would not become as central as it is now. Like, there's a lot of guys that are extremely fucking mad about it, and they should be. This should be this should be one of the most animating factors, because this directly impacts our ability to improve our lives and to achieve our life goals, right? Like, we talk a lot about lookism, we talk a lot about the mating market between men and women, but it is just a bottom line. It's unless you're a certain kind of like super attractive guy, even Chad Lights, even like high tier normies, you have to have at least some economic means going for you, for the most part. It's very rare that you're going to find a woman that would tolerate you being a house husband, or her out earning you by a huge amount. Like that, it becomes a huge problem. You know, if I was in the progressive wing, that's what I would be looking at, anyways. I went to a party on my small boat, and there's a sandbar there where people hang out. I was overhearing the boomers all they talk about is healthcare, money, and nigball. Yeah, that's not surprising. That's not surprising. Well, a lot of the boomers, all this stuff is abstract and theoretical to them, because they're, for the most part, they're either retired or they're on their way to retiring, right? So they don't even really care. It's more theoretical. It's like, oh, did you hear this news story about this situation? It doesn't impact them personally. Yeah. My issue with your accelerationism is that things can get incredibly bad without leading to a revolt. Look at India or coffin apartments in Hong Kong. Living standards can still go down a lot. That's true, but that's true. I wouldn't say that there's ever going to be a revolt. As I said, what I think is going to happen, it's not that you're going to make people so mad that they revolt. That's not going to happen ever. What will happen is and you're seeing this, is that there's an incoming group of these striver ethnics, these second-gen immigrant, first, in some cases first-gen, I'm pretty sure Mamdani's first-gen immigrants, who are extremely ambitious. They come from rich families. They have a mixture of contempt and resentment for the current American population. If we're talking like the white population and also the ruling class population, which is mostly a mixture of Jews and whites. They resent them because they come from poor countries that suck, and they look at the white population as like that's where the resentment comes from, because they feel like they feel this inferiority complex towards the white population. And then there's also contempt because they're wealthy and elite from their countries, and so they're substantially above the median, say the median white American, in terms of their material wealth, in terms of their education, in terms of their intelligence. And so they simultaneously look down in contempt and look up in envy at the in resentment at the white American population. And they also view the elite population the same way. And they're very ambitious, and they are aiming to take control of the American elite. And the way that they're going to do it is through these democratic socialists. They're going to use the democratic socialists to take control of the state, and then when they control the state, they're going to use that state to expropriate these populations. You're going to see it through seizing assets, stripping assets through taxation, unrealized capital gains tax. I mean, all these things seem crazy, or rather seem unrealistic when they're being done on the state level or on the city level. But when they're being done on the national level, that's a different story. And then once you control the country, you're in political control of the country. If billionaires try and flee with their assets, and because you want to strip their assets, or at least some of them, all you have to do is sanction them. All you have to do is say, if you provide safe harbor to these billionaires, we are going to freeze all of your assets within the United States, and we are going to appropriate them and sanction and cripple your tax haven's capacity for acting as a tax haven. So that's what I see happening. I'm not saying it's going to be a good thing either, because ultimately they're going to try and strip everybody who's not them, effectively. Like they're also going to go after the white middle class. I mean, it's what's his name? What was his name? The Cenk Uyghur's nephew, the Turk roach. I forget his name, but he was like, "Oh yeah, we need to impoverish the white middle class." It's like, well, first of all, why are you even saying that out loud? That's an incredibly stupid thing to say out loud. Shit. He's the one who shocked his dog. I don't even watch these guys. Hassan Piker, that's it. Hassan Piker. Yeah. Yeah, he's like, I'm going to impoverish the white middle class, yuck, yuck, yuck. It's an incredibly stupid thing to say, but they're going to attempt that. Like, they're going to start stripping the millionaires and billionaires first, and then they're going to move their way down the ladder. I mean, that's just how it works. And it's not going to look like the Soviet Union or whatever. It's going to be like these third world countries, just how they operate. And you can even see it because there's another guy I was talking to on my Discord server, and he did a pizza delivery. He's like doing a gig job as a Uber Eats pizza guy or something like that. And he did a pizza delivery to a rich Indian family, and in Texas, I think. And he noticed that they were the thing that they do primarily, and this is very different from how Anglos act, is that they try and display and show off their wealth as much as possible. It's known as conspicuous consumption, and just gaudy, ostentatious displays of wealth. This is very unusual in the Anglosphere. In the Anglosphere, the primary sign of class is that you live, especially visibly, much beneath your material means. Whereas in most of the third world, if you're rich, you show off as your wealth as much as possible. Like you rub it in as much as possible. Well, this produces resentment in the population that doesn't have this wealth. And this is where you're going to see this generate as well. As the American population becomes more and more non-American and their elite becomes more and more Asian, more and more Indian, and they become more and more fixated on like being very visibly expressing their wealth and their status and showing it off, you're going to see a lot more like the American theory behind, because if you look at how Americans think about wealth, it's almost like a moral category where if you're wealthy, you're a better person, you're a morally superior person than if you were poor, right? And when the American and the English elite had this sense of noblesse oblige, and they also had a sense of you need to be humble and modest with your displays of wealth, that you should try and be self-effacing. You were able to kind of smuggle that theory of the moral superiority of the rich in with that culture. When you don't have that culture and you just have these sort of gaudy gold teeth, like it's kind of like how black rappers do I remember reading something about how black rappers would actually rent jewelry in order to eat, and we're talking rich ones too. We're not talking poor ones. Like rich ones would rent jewelry, extremely expensive jewelry, to look even richer than they actually are. Like once that mentality enters into the mainstream upper classes of American society, you're going to see a cultural shift that's pretty rapid. It's not going to make things better per se. And actually, I'm kind of hoping it doesn't. I'd like to see things get a lot worse in America, because it means that the rest of the world might have a breather, right? Anyways, let me catch up on the chats here. In regards to what you said last stream, it's all a giant shit test to see if the local men beat the invaders, and if not, they breed the invaders. Which scenario would be the winning for the local men? On one hand, the invaders breed your women. On the other hand, you save the foids from the trouble they cause themselves, and will thus create more. Well, I don't actually believe that that's what it is. I mean, that's one of the theories that they came up with. Because it's like, how do you explain what women are doing politically? That's the main issue, because they're acting so much against their own interests, right? And so the issue is like, why are they doing this? Hang on just one second. The issue is like, why are they doing this? Why are they supporting things that will eventually lead to them basically getting mass surprise snuggled, right? And this is just one of the theories they've come up with. And as I've said, I think that that's false. I think that and I've laid it out in my videos multiple times. I think that women are they've become a separate political category in comparison to the men, where they think of themselves as separate from, if we're talking like white women, European women, they think of themselves as separate from European men and their political interests. So their concern is, when they see nationalists, what they see is that this could potentially increase this could potentially limit the personal freedoms, the sexual freedoms, the economic freedoms that women have if the nationalist men take power. And that's their primary axis of concern. Our own men are a bigger threat to us than these foreigners, because even though these foreigners are a danger to us in some ways as well, they're also fewer in number, and they support the political coalition I'm a part of. That's the reason why they do it. It's not because they have like some sort of surprise snuggle fantasy. I mean, some of them do, but I think for the most part, it's what I described. It's the political identification difference. And by the time that they realize, by the time that they're, and I'm talking about a collective phenomenon, of course. Obviously, once you get down to the individual level, you can see a lot of variation. But if you go to the eagle's eye view and you're looking at like the political behavior of millions of women, if you look at the variables that move them towards a single direction, It's going to be, what are my personal interests and what is the biggest threat to those interests? Okay, the immigrants represent maybe a personal threat in some instances, though not all, and it's localized typically as well, which is why middle class and upper class white women are much less concerned about immigrants than lower class white women, because they have to deal with them a lot less. So they're just a useful political ally in that regard. Versus, if a government comes in that is nationalistic and starts to prioritize young men, maybe in terms of career options or other things like that, that's a very different conversation, right? And then once you realize that, then it becomes a different, like how do you deal with this politically? Okay, and by the way, I think my system is a lot more coherent, or my explanation is a lot more coherent than what most of these nationalists talk about. Because it just doesn't make sense. Suicidal empathy. So they're so empathetic, they're so loving and caring that they're willing to support the industrial sexual exploitation of young British girls and defend it because of... And it's like, no, it has nothing to do with empathy. They just see them as political allies. That's all it comes down to. Why are white women race traitors? Is it their natural inclination or Zog propaganda, or maybe both? It's I don't think that it's natural, like it's unique to white women. I think that's just how, like, all women that are subjected to the same pressures, socially, politically, they would do the same thing. At least that's what I believe. I don't think black women or Middle Eastern women or whatever are any uniquely special. Maybe I'm wrong, but or that white women are uniquely treacherous compared to them. I will say that white women are uniquely spoiled in the sense that, like, you could at least understand the logic of why, like, an Afghan woman would want to see the Taliban overthrown and, like, Americans take over Afghanistan and turn it into a gay libtard shithole, right? Utopia for libtards and fags. Like, you could understand why an Afghan woman would want to do that, because look at what the Taliban do in Afghanistan. It makes sense. But if you look at the lifestyle that Europeans have provided white women, or women in general, and then you look at how their attitudes towards us, that to me is far more worthy of condemnation. And it's a point I've made because I've interacted with some feminists from Muslim countries, and I've been like, look, you should be, like, your primary targeting should be towards these white feminists that are destroying our countries and making it so that our countries will be incapable of imposing feminism on the rest of the world, because that's what you're kind of depending on. That's what you're hoping for. Okay, like I talked to an Algerian feminist, and I'm like, look, your hope, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but I'm saying from her perspective, what she wants is for feminism and liberalism to gradually take over the country and supplant the authoritarianism that centers male interests out of its own self-interests, right? They want gay liberal democracy, gay feminist liberal democracy. In order to get that, like, if Europe collapses into anarchy or like some kind of quasi-Islamist state, that's the end of the projection of liberalism outwards onto the world, because it's only organic. It only comes naturally from us. Feminism and liberalism are only organic and only native to Europe. They don't exist natively anywhere else in the world. It's a foreign ideology imposed from outside in all the rest of the world. And as soon as we're gone and we're not able to impose it on you, that's it. Like, the rest of your men are going to see that ideology as something foreign to their identity civilizationally, and they're going to say, we need to reject feminism because it's not part of who we are. It's a foreign colonial export. That's how they're going to frame it. And that's a much more compelling argument than anything that we have in Europe. So your interest should be going after these white feminists and saying, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you attacking your own men? At least come up with some kind of compromise so that your countries can continue to exist, so that we can benefit, like we being the women, in these countries can benefit from exporting feminism and liberalism through globalism. But, I suppose to the benefit of these men in these countries, that's not going to happen. Like, our women are clearly committed to our destruction. So, Mercer, did you see that pic posted by Lavender about white Australian women from a century ago, men marrying Cantonese men so they could beat them without being hit back? Yeah, I posted that on my server. It was pretty funny. I was like, is this a white pill for rice cells, or is this a rice pill? Because it's like, it's a white pill because you're getting a white foid, but then the downside is that she beats you up. That's a tough one. That's a very tough one. But yeah, I'm like, I don't know how domestic violence worked in China, but I'd be kind of surprised if they didn't have any domestic violence in China. I think it's just because they're so... the Chinese are a little taller now, but they were very small in the pre-modern era because they just didn't have any protein. So they would end up being quite short. We're talking like 5'1", 5'2". So... These browns would happily castrate their men to get with a white man. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I've heard this, but then when I see them interact, they don't seem to like white men. Like if you go into their communities and see them talk with each other, like they're very careful to avoid saying anything that could be construed as positive about white men. And I'm not talking in mixed communities where there's like men and women. I'm talking within their own communities. Like if they have to give some kind of positive comparison to white men in terms of women's rights, they'll always make sure to include, but, they're also just as bad because Southeast Asia or whatever. Like, they'll include some kind of something additional to make sure that everybody knows that white men are also very bad people. That's been my personal experience. Now, part of that might be sour grapes. Like if these are chicks that are just not able to attract a white man, maybe that's why. But that's just what I've seen. I mean, I don't know. Could be wrong, but... Did you go over Jason Arday already? At least he was married to a looks-matched black woman. No, I've been kind of bloviating on that. I'm going to read a quick thing of his whole story. But I'm just going to say... I know that it's enjoyable or it's easy, I should say, to take the piss out of black women. They are an easy target. But I mean, Jason Arday is very obviously gay. He's very obviously gay. He's about as straight as a ball of yarn, all right? The guy is, as they say, he's a down low N-word. He's fucking wearing eyeliner, dude. He's wearing eyeliner. Come on. Okay, very much fruity. So him being married to a black woman, I believe that in their community they call that wearing a beard. I believe that's what the term that they use in that community. So, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read his some of the claims that he made and what happened. So he was diagnosed with autism at age 3, allegedly. Nonverbal and mute until age 11. Oh, God. Illiterate until 18. And faced multiple serious medical issues, including a brain tumor, epilepsy, and others. And he presented himself as overcoming these health challenges to achieve academic success. He was illiterate until 18, and then suddenly he becomes a Cambridge professor. This is all him claiming this, by the way. This isn't empirically proven. This is just what he's claimed. It's all unraveled afterwards, but let's keep going here. And he says that he ran extreme distances for charity, including claiming 30 marathons in 35 days, partly with a broken leg, 300 miles in 3 days, 600 miles in 6 days. Dude, that's literally, I think, physically impossible. I'm pretty sure you cannot go 100 miles in a day. That would be like 100... Actually, I got to convert this to kilometers. Hold on. 100 miles to Cam. It's 160. Yeah, I thought it was about 160 kilometers. 161 kilometers divided by 24. Dude, that's like 6.7 kilometers an hour. And literally non-stop for 24 hours. That would be non-stop. It's literally impossible, I'm pretty sure. He claims to have personally raised 4.5 to 5.5 million pounds for dozens of charities. And he claimed a PhD from Liverpool John Moores University, claimed a master's in psychodynamic practices / counseling from Birkbeck, University of London, and related qualifications. Held honorary visiting professorships. University of Glasgow School of Education, honorary role at Durham. Authored a book titled Being Young, Black, and Male, Challenging the Dominant Discourse. And he appeared in the BBC's 7 Up series, semi-professional football or other sporting achievements. Oh, here's another one. This is claimed, by the way. Received extreme racist threats, a severed pig's head delivered to his family home with police investigation tracing it to a specific butcher. Bananas, bullets, masked knife-wielding intruders at his Cambridge office. And how the claims were debunked. Okay. Yeah, not even Steve Hoka could run that much. Yeah, exactly. Steve Hoka is basically the ruler stick that I use for what is physically possible. If it's not something that Steve Hoka could do, I don't consider it physically possible. Okay? And there's no way that he would have been able to do that. You know, despite evidence of him running marathons, well, some of the guys watching this were not even conceived yet. They were not an inky in the eye of their fathers. Just being an ordinary Negro is not an option for Arday, rather no. Well, no, this is why I actually really like this guy. Like, he just went completely over the top and just kept going with it. Like, I actually have to admire the boldness. Like, I really do. Like, I could understand, like, maybe claiming that he had a degree from somewhere that he didn't in order to get into a professorship and then just shut his mouth about it afterwards. And then it comes out 10 years later or something. But no, this guy just kept going on and on and on about this nonsense. Like, coming up with these insane stories. And it's one of those things, it kind of reminds me of a certain other ethnic group where the theory is you make up such an outlandish story that there's no way people would believe you would make it up because it sounds too absurd to make up. It sounds too extreme to make up. Right? Anyways, so Nathan Coffness is an interesting story because he's one of God's chosen people. And I actually knew about him before this through his back and forth with Kevin McDonald. He's actually a very dishonest academic, but he's only conniving and dishonest when it comes to his own people, right? He's fine with he's in some ways he kind of reminds me of a certain type of white nationalist, where he is perfectly happy talking about the behaviors of other races that he considers beneath him. But as soon as there's anything unflattering about his own people, or unfavorable comparisons to his own people, suddenly he gets extremely defensive, and suddenly he doesn't like the race science anymore. Like, that's Nathan Coffness. But in this particular case, he was actually correct. And I think the only reason why he was able to even bring this guy down was because he's Jewish. I think if he was just a random goy, he would have just been shut down and erased. And there's proof of this as well, because there was a journalist that was investigating this Arday guy. And the police actually warned him off and told him, like, Arday actually called the police and had the police threaten this journalist with legal action or police action. So, and of course the journalist was not one of God's chosen, so. Anyways, Kofnes and others documented dozens to over 100 and 180 passages in Arday's 2015 PhD thesis that closely matched or reproduced text from Paula Zwozdiak-Meyer's earlier 2009 dissertation, including a near-identical phrasing, structure, and even title elements. I think he also had typos in his PhD thesis, like the typos in the title or something absurd like that. Similar issues appeared in published papers, e.g. 2018 Social Sciences article drawing heavily from the work of Anjum Mimon and team. Beyond language copying, analyses found recycled or near identical interview quotes attributed to different participants across Arday's studies, impossible sample statistics, e.g. demographic breakdowns exceeding 100%, or mismatched counts of interviewees versus quoted individuals, and other inconsistencies suggesting fabrication of data or interviews. Liverpool John Moores University reviewed the PhD and did not uphold plagiarism charges, attributing issues to possible honest error related to supervision and disabilities. But later media analyses and Cambridge's own investigation into qualifications and appointments highlighted broader problems. Some papers received quiet corrections. Now, I'm going to get into what he could have done to rescue himself from this whole fiasco. Like, he could have actually turned this into an epic career move, and I'll explain in a little bit. But I'm going to catch up on the chat here. Look in the stream topic box. Why? What have we got there? Hang on. I'll take a look. This better not be a waste of my time now, because you're wasting the whole stream's time if that's the case. Let me see here. Stream topic box. Oh, this is just essay posting. My brother's 10 years old and he forgotten all his training, randomly says misogynistic shit. He was raised by lesbians. Yeah, no shit. Okay, well, that's I don't know what this has to do with anything. But anyways, yup, it's harassment to expose the truth. What do you think of Richard Spencer going from far right to far left? I don't think Richard Spencer has actually changed any of his views, really. I think that he's always been this sort of upper-class Anglo snob supremacist. And he just believes, and in some ways he kind of reminds me, I should probably stop mentioning him because this is going to like summon him from the ether, but he kind of reminds me of Tails in a lot of ways because he sort of views the people of his own race who he sees as beneath him. He views them with almost more contempt than he views racial outsiders that are part of his class. And in that way, he kind of reminds me of the transition that the group of nationalists that Tails, and I'm not saying Tails agrees with Richard Spencer at all. I'm just saying, like, they kind of remind me of the psychology, of each other's psychology, where they're thinking more about how, like, they're more focused on intra-group snobbery over out-group concerns. And that's really what Richard Spencer's about. So he thinks like joining the Democrats. He thinks the Democrats are the party of the wealthy white elite. And he's hoping that he can infiltrate them in some way and shift them towards both a race and class interest in like re-engineering the American system to be this sort of like what it was before the Jews took over in the 70s, which was an Anglo-American neoliberal capitalist enterprise. Like, it was about opening up the global markets. That's what Henry Luce was about. Henry Luce was the guy who founded Time magazine, and he was very much in the he was very much a typical WASP, where he wanted to break down all of the traditional societies in the world in order to open them up for economic activity for the Americans. Like, that's the way that he thought. And that's what the purpose of Time and Life magazine were. And by the way, he was also very tightly tied up with the CIA. This is sort of like the last iteration of the WASP elite in America before they got replaced by Jews in the 70s. And that was like the 50s and 60s. Yeah. So I think Richard Spencer sees himself as sort of trying to resurrect that through the liberal white elite population. There's always a grifter fed planet. Remember to unite the right. Merkel cartoon is very similar to this. Wasn't Merkel crying about how it's not fair that she was like literally crying about the situation with the Syrian migrants or whatever, and how it was not fair to her political career or some bullshit like that. If your city hubs are war zones, class will not matter anymore. Well, the idea is that they don't live in the cities, right? Or they live in gated communities. They sort of are thinking the same way that some Latin American elites think, where because they live in their enclosed gated communities with private security, these sort of walled gardens, they don't have to worry about the rest of the society. Like the rest of society can burn down. That's how I think that's how I think Richard Spencer and that crowd sort of conceive themselves as. And also another one that's very similar, who more emphasizes the neoliberalism than anything regarding race. It's probably like anti-white, but he's a really committed neoliberal, is Richard Hanania. That's another one. Imagine having a wife, kids, and money and still wasting your time online for politics. Well, I mean, if we're talking about Richard Spencer still, I mean, the guy comes from old money, right? So he can pretty much do whatever he wants. He just has to worry about daddy's money, trust fund money coming in. He doesn't have to worry about working for a living. So, I think Tails had some good points about slang, pretty boy slang in certain contexts. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. It's not exactly anything new either. Face and LMS never claimed you have to be hyper-masculine, for example. Yeah, that's true as well. Though I will say pretty boys have a much shorter expiration date, where they end up, usually by 25 it's over for them. Whereas the sort of Brad Pitt masculine look can, even if it's not necessarily universal, and especially younger women tend to be more attracted to the pretty boys than the Brad Pitt types. But like if we're talking women that are 22 plus, you tend to see more of a shift towards that kind of masculine look in their preference. And then if you have the masculine look, it can last a lot longer because the signs of aging that come with that, they really don't start wearing that look down until you start getting a lot of skin sagging. Like getting a few wrinkles and lines, as long as you have the well-defined bones and well-defined facial features, you can usually get away with it for a long time. Whose competition is the bigger victim? Syrian migrants or homosexual transsexuals? Yeah, and it's pretty funny, but the migrants will win out because race is more important than sexual behavior for these people. Sexual identity, like biological sexual identity, might be a bit of a different conversation. But anyways, let's continue reading about this Arday guy. Let's see here. Historical fundraising and athletics. Historical records, just giving pages, and Arday's own evolving statements. Evolving statements means he would say something and then he would forget what he said and he would come up with something else later. Showed a far smaller individual totals, e.g. hundreds of pounds on specific challenges. Claims of multi-million-pound solo fundraising escalated over years without supporting evidence. When pressed, Arday revised them. He said he was part of larger syndicates or collectives of 100 people, whom he could not name due to NDAs, very convenient, and that media focused on him. The 600-mile claim was adjusted to 12 days. Publishers scrubbed specific high figures from his bio and memoir details. Or materials. Credentials and publications. Universities denied the claimed visiting honorary titles. Glasgow explicitly stated he was not a visiting professor. Durham said he had no current role. Birkbeck found no records of him studying there. Birkbeck. Wait, is Birkbeck what he claimed he got his PhD from? Liverpool John Moores University. And a master's from Birkbeck. So his master's is fake. Interesting. Okay. The claimed book was never published. Palgrave had received a proposal but did not issue it. The 7-Up claim was chronologically impossible. The series began in 1964. Arday was born in 1985. BBC rejected relatedly. This guy's a fucking idiot. Childhood and threats. Schoolmates and acquaintances contradicted the mute/illiterate narrative, describing him as verbal, socially engaged, and a class clown who played football. Police and the named butcher categorically denied any investigation into a pig's head delivery. Claims of campus intruders lacked corroboration. And then he denied being a liar or fantasist, attributing textual issues to autism-related mimicry, inadequate PhD supervision, and clerical errors, while framing the scrutiny as a racially motivated campaign against black academics. So, what I think he could have done, and then he was found non-responsive. Let me just scroll down here. Emergency services said he was found unresponsive at an address in Battersea. Yeah, so he probably roped. And allegations of plagiarism. Family said in a statement they were in shock to have lost this amazing father, partner, brother, uncle, and son. So what he could have done, because he was obviously what happened was the gig was up. He was screwed. Everybody knew that he was lying about his experiences and his achievements. He could have pulled himself out of the fire by saying, this whole project of mine of making up these increasingly absurd stories, all of this was actually an experiment to demonstrate the degree to which DEI and racial politics will allow somebody to get away with these claims. Like, that's, if I were him, that's what I would have told him to do. Play this off as if this was an experiment to see how absurd your stories could become before anybody would question it, and see how far into academia you can get before somebody calls your bluff. And then he could have flipped into like the leftists are the real racist or something like that, like the racism of low expectations bullshit, and become like a right-wing podcaster or something like that. That's what he could have done if he had thought about it. Instead, he roped. And now you're seeing all these posts from these alt-writers who are like, oh, this is so terrible, such a sad, he didn't deserve to die. Oh. And I'm just like, dude, okay, it would have been funnier if he would have gotten away with it, but who gives a shit if he roped? Like, he was a complete fucking liar and fraud. Like, it's good riddance that he self-deleted. I mean, in that sense, you know, if he was too much of a bitch to handle it himself, that's, what a tragedy. No, who gives a shit? It's just a shame he didn't try and get his way out of it. Whoa, it's just a prank, bro. That's exactly what he should have done. That would have been awesome. And the thing is, I can actually, like, as soon as I found out that he roped, I lost the respect that I had for him. Because I initially, when this story broke, I just can't help but respect somebody who just goes way overboard and still keeps winning. And he keeps going with it and gets more and more ridiculous. I can actually admire the cojones, or as the Jews say, the chutzpah. I can admire it. But then when you self-delete when the gig is up and you don't try and come up with some Uno reverse card to get out of this, that's where I'm like, dude, you had all the balls to claim this shit. It makes me think that you didn't actually get off on the thrill of coming up with insane stories and having people believe them. You're just too stupid to realize how insane the story sounded. And that is actually quite unfortunate. Yeah. This is an experiment is like the academia equivalent of I was just trolling / pretending to be retarded. Yeah, I mean, it is true. Look, I'm not saying it would necessarily work. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed get out of jail free card, but I think that people would at least find it entertaining. And he would have a reputation destruction in academia, but I think people would find him still kind of likable personally if he pulled that off. And instead he just self-deleted, which is just, ugh. Come on. And also, I will go to the ground defending my claim that this guy's gay. I'm sorry, he just has a very stereotypically gay phenotype. Setting aside that he wears eyeliner, right? Because, J.D. Vance also wears eyeliner, but he doesn't really have a gay phenotype. This guy 100% does, and it's undeniable. Which makes him marrying a black woman all the more unfortunate. God, I feel bad for the sisters. They really get a lot of shit thrown at them. Can't stand the English accent. It's so annoying. I've been in Disney World this past week and I'm surrounded by Brit bongs. Sick of hearing their voices. I don't mind it when it's the females. Well, it depends on the subgroup. I kind of like the Northern English accent, especially when they say, "You're vile. You're vile." I have family in Northern England, and it's not so much the accent, it's the local lingo that they use that I find really fun. Question is, how is it illegal to say that he was a fraud? What was the journalist threatened with? He was just threatened with harassment or something along those lines. It was some kind of intimidation that was being used. Is Mercer trying to be macho? LMAO. I absolutely am trying to be macho. I'm like the most macho masculine guy I know. I prefer the American accent for some reason. It feels more straightforward. It does when you're talking to people, but I don't like it on women. And obviously Canada, we have a very similar accent, right? Pretty much the same. I don't like when women have the accent because it almost feels like you're talking to a man. There isn't really a difference in register. Unless they do that really annoying vocal fry accent, which I can't even do, but... You have to have a dead man switch when doing something like that. A third party can't verify what you're doing from the beginning. Yeah, but he clearly wasn't smart enough to think ahead that far. The guy's... he's something else. Yeah, look, as I said, I can respect the attempt, all right? But... yeah. Anyways, moving on from that, there wasn't really that much to say about it. But there's this Clancy chick. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Clancy. I probably should have done this beforehand, but what can I say? So this Lindsay Clancy case, she murdered her... So she was a... let me see here. Clancy case. Let's see. Oh God, she has that evil bitch look. So this woman, I'm sure you guys have heard by now. She's murdered her 3 children, strangled them to death, and then she jumped out of a 2-story building, which I think was her house, in an attempt to make it look like she was in some way remorseful. But obviously it wasn't far enough off the ground that she actually, could seriously threaten her life, right? So there's a ton of women, and it's become almost like I'm trying to be charitable with how they oh God, yeah, this one here, the Musgrove Family Fund. All these women have sort of latched onto this as this. It's almost like they seem to think that they can't conceive of, or at least in their minds, they can't conceive of a woman actually doing this to her own children. And so they're coming up with these alternative explanations that the husband, because apparently she was on all these psychiatric drugs, the husband worked from home and tried to help out. And I think he also hired a nanny or something. And she waited until he left the house and then murdered their children. It's almost like they can't imagine that she would do this voluntarily and like of her own free will. And so they've been trying to come up with conspiracy theories where the husband was secretly responsible for it. And it's actually become this huge trend on TikTok and on other social media. And to me, because like I'm used to seeing a lot of hysterically evil shit. In this case, I don't actually think that that's what it is. I think for the most part, there's just a lot of these women who have watched far too much true crime. And are therefore, they're trying to see a true crime story in this where one doesn't really exist because it's just a straight up she murdered her kids. I suspect that that's what's going on because it seems far too frivolous for what they're doing. But of course, a lot of it is also just women's in-group preference, right? Like they can't imagine that a woman would do this. They assume that the man must be in some way responsible. There was a lot of people that were making a good reciprocal case of like the opposite situation. That guy who murdered his entire family. It was like his wife and his 2 kids, I think. It would be as if men were latching onto that case to try and prove that he was innocent or that there was someone else was responsible for it and he was set up. Like the one that's if you've ever argued with women. Or you've argued with people with regards to white men, they'll always bring this guy up. I forget his name, but they always bring him up. That guy who shot his wife and his kid, or 2 kids, and then he's in jail. They always bring him up. I forget his name, but he's like the symbol of white men being evil. And again, it would be like as if white men or men in general latched onto that case and were like, no, this is a total false accusation, whatever. This is basically the equivalent. But even then, it's like I've seen a lot of silly stuff, but I haven't really seen anything that bad in terms of like posts. It's mostly like, oh, she must be innocent. It's like, yeah, this is just typical in-group preference by women. But for some reason, the right wing has become really fixated on it. I'm just like, oh, God. Just running out of content. You know, I think part of it is just that they're fixated on content. Need more content. Here's another example, actually. So they're doing shit like this. So this is reading the diary. I think this was reading the crime scene, I think it was. And it's like, no man will ever understand a mother's brain. This is a diary entry from any and all mothers. Like, it's just this sort of shit. Anyways. Civilization is a masculine project. Only men actually care about the nation, technology, and all of that. Well, yeah, it's because what is a nation, right? A nation is a fixed set of borders you impose on a territory, right? You can't really have a nation with women. It just doesn't exist in their minds. It doesn't exist in their psychology, you know? And they perceive it as an imposition, you know? Like, the reason why nationalism was taken for granted by the earliest enfranchised women, so this would be like the 1920s, and around there, the reason why you could not have to worry about them acting as your political enemy in the elections is because they didn't really, it was just taken for granted. It was an assumption. It's kind of like the family, the traditional family structure. It was something that they never had to, it was outside the Overton window, you know? And this is another thing, it reminds me of something. It's sort of like sexual behavior, where the issue isn't so much that a traditional society forces everybody to do the right thing. And this is something that a lot of liberals get wrong. and feminists, because when you defend like traditional sexual morality, they will come back and say, well, in those societies there was shotgun weddings, there was prostitution, in pre-sexual revolution societies there was plenty of people that were hypocrites. I'm like, yes, that's true. It wasn't like everybody behaved in a perfectly moral way. I myself have argued against that as well. What I have said is the Overton window of acceptable behavior was different. And by that I mean, so in like the 1950s or whatever, premarital sex would have been seen as socially ranging from frowned on to taboo. Not necessarily to the extent that you would get ostracized from society, but you would be met with strong disapproval. It doesn't mean it never happened, but it meant that it was like shifted outside the mainstream acceptable behavior for society. And then if you start looking at things like homosexuality, that was completely out, like that's out of the range of even tolerable deviance, right? And the idea is that you can't force everybody to behave in the exact way you want, but you can have the range of deviance, you can lock it to a certain set of standards. So for example, as I said, like the relatively conservative 1950s sexual norms. That means that your range of deviance is going to be basically adultery and premarital sex. And even within that, like the sex acts themselves are far more tame than what you have now. Like in the 1950s, you did not have tossing salad, right? You did not have licking people's buttholes, right? I think even blowjobs were considered very taboo. Like that was considered like that's very much on the edge in that period of time, all right? And that's the Overton window. That's how it works. I'm trying to think where I was going with that, actually. But anyways, as far as traditionalism goes, that's what I come back to. I'm like, it's not that you want to force everybody to behave exactly the way you want them to. It's you want the acceptable range of behavior to be from this to that, and you achieve that by making this the standard. Chris Watts, that's it. Chris Watts. You're right. Chris Watts was his name. Nobody believes we're an empire. So far off the mark here. Who are we talking about? Are we talking about the British Empire? Because the British Empire, it was the end of it with World War II. I mean, it was already on its way out after World War I. It was pretty much unsustainable. But it could have the British Empire could have shed India and most of Africa and retained the other colonies. Like basically the ones that were settled by actual English settlers, plus a couple Caribbean islands. Like they could have done that and sustained the empire that way. But anyways, I'd rather have their man for themselves, but if they got to share Chad, they'd rather do that than date their look smash. I don't know. I see a lot of women doing neither. Right. Like I do think, because typically I would say it's pretty much unheard of that women will get into relationships with men where it's like a one-sided polygamy, I guess, or one-sided open marriage where the man is with multiple women, but they're only one of the women that the man is with. Obviously that does happen, but I would say it's exceedingly rare. I would say most of the time, Chads rack up a high body count through rapid serial monogamy. So they'll go through like one woman after another. And in a lot of cases, if you're an attractive man and you can attract a woman very easily, the incentive for you to stay in the relationship is much more limited because the barrier of entry to a relationship is very low for you. You can get into a relationship very easily. So it's not like you're going to be concerned about loneliness if you exit a relationship. And then on top of that, you have no incentive to develop your own character because, again, women are going to reward you based on your looks, right? And I would say the same is, to be fair, I would say the same is true for attractive women. Attractive women have the exact same trajectory where the barrier to entry into relationships with men that are considered desirable is quite easy for them. It's quite low, barrier of entry. And as a result, and the men will often tolerate a high degree of bad behavior. And as a result, they never develop their personalities in the long term. You know, it doesn't even necessarily mean that they're like, they might develop their personalities in terms of like their treatment of their friends, let's say. But they never develop their personalities in terms of how they treat a romantic partner because they never have to, right? And this is where you'll have like, it's kind of a trope actually. It's like a common personality stereotype where you'll have like the attractive Chad who always has a girlfriend that's mad at him, but he's actually a great buddy who will be there when you need him, like that kind of thing. Like that's actually a fairly common archetype I've seen. I didn't mean polygamy, but rather women often date Chads that they know aren't faithful long term. Yeah, or they think that it'll be different this time. Like most of the time they go into those relationships not thinking like, oh, this is going to be... Well, I mean, sometimes they do. That, you know, and this is a weird thing. This is one of these things that, I don't know, it seems to be something that women and men really have a hard time. Or it's hard. It seems that it's not intuitive to women why men would find this very offensive. Where it's like, you'll see a woman say, well, I didn't like this guy's personality, but I was sexually attracted to him, so I only had sex with him, but I didn't get into a relationship with him. But this guy, I really like his personality, and we're really compatible, so I wanted to be in a relationship with him before I had sex with him, or something along those lines. And it's this really... it's like they don't understand why a man would find that so offensive, right? Obviously we know, but you'll hear different answers. Like you'll hear guys say, well, if she wasn't willing to do, like give it up to me right away, whereas she was willing to give it up to the guy right away, the other guy who she was attracted to, but was not relationship material. Well, that just makes me feel devalued. She doesn't desire me as much. And that is true. Kind of, but at least for me, it's more like, why would you want to be in a relationship with a woman who would be willing to do that anyways? Like, why would that even be considered desirable behavior from a woman? Steve Hoka is right that an attractive woman doesn't need $1 million because she's worth millions of dollars. That's true. That's true. Hoka is on Tel Aviv payroll. I don't know, like there is that stream that I did with him where he never what's the term? He never unfavored it or privated it, which is very annoying because that was a stream that I thought was really good. Like we put a lot of work into it. And we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about the Jewish issue. But, okay, I could understand if the issue is like I was saying things that were too controversial to leave up. And so he wanted to take it down to avoid issues with his channel. I understand that. But at least send me a copy of the stream so that I can upload clips of it myself. Because there were some pretty good clips that we had. Whatever, you know, it is his stream, so it's up to him what he wants to do. Anyways, there was another story that let me pull it up here. There was another story that came out about this surrogate from let's see here. Gotta look it up here. Here he is. Chris Burnett did a post on it. That's a good one. Okay. B. California couple pays surrogate to rent her womb. Baby diagnosed with severe heart defect at 20 weeks. California couple immediately demands she abort the defective product. California couple offers her $2,000 kill fee. Contract says that if abortion is unavailable, she has to travel to another location. Contract says that refusing the requested abortion is a material breach. Threatens to sue her for $250,000 in damages if she refuses. She nopes out, cuts contact, and books a flight to Texas with help from based pro-life groups. Gives birth to a living, breathing boy they wanted dead. Once the baby is born, the contract gives the intended parents control over life support or other extraordinary medical treatment. Couple immediately fires paperwork screaming about contract violation and tries to seize the kid while refusing consent to life-saving surgery. California couple demands she name the baby Rumi. Surrogate calls him Gabriel. Texas Attorney General intervenes, tells hospitals you will keep this baby alive or else. Judge orders life-sustaining care. California couple show up in Texas and obtain physical custody of the newborn, file restraining order against the surrogate that prevents her from seeing or upholding the baby, changes baby's name to Rumi. Now, and this is, of course, a black queen defending the pro-life position now. She also has a shoulder tattoo. This just makes her even more based. But anyways, what was interesting about this actually was not even the story itself, which is just sort of, I mean, it's another interesting case where body autonomy versus the contractual issues. But what's weird is you would expect that the feminist position would be that my body, my choice. Like it, presumably, like if we're just ignoring the rules-based system and like what benefits women the most, she should be the one to determine, like it should be that because her body is being used to incubate the baby, she should have control over what she decides to do with the child inside her, right? Like that, in theory, that's pro-choice, right? But all the feminists were rolling in on the side of the married couple and they were actually making arguments like, oh, this is a contract, she can't violate the contract, like, and it fucking pissed me off because, and then you'd see people saying, if she didn't like this contract, she shouldn't have signed it, or she shouldn't have become a surrogate. And I got so fucking angry at this because I thought these bitches, they would never allow this argument. They would never allow this argument if we were talking about marriage and no-fault divorce, where if we're making an argument against no-fault divorce and they say, well, what happens if the woman's unhappy in her marriage? And I were to say, well, she should have thought about that before getting married. If you don't want to risk being in an unhappy marriage, don't get married. They would never accept that argument. They would never accept it. But in this case, they're perfectly willing to go for it. You know, there's no principles here, which, you know, it is what it is, right? Like, I don't think anybody has any principles, myself included, ultimately. Like, ultimately, we have interests, and we use we use the theories of our principles to advance our interests. That's really what it comes down to. And I think women are pretty much the same way. I think this is just a facet of human nature, right? Like, ultimately, like, this is why I was attracted to Carl Schmitt and the ideas behind, like, his political theory about how humans actually operate. Like, I was attracted to that because it seemed like a much more bullshit-free system than what we have now. And this is what we have as a consequence. But actually, one of the things that was particularly nasty about this is that I responded on my what do you call it? On my account that I use for like following stuff on X and favoriting stuff, I posted a few comments to women on this that were just basically disgusting comments. And then I started to get in my feed these feminist posts. And then you realize, like, how vicious and evil some of these women actually are. You know, like, up until now, I've really thought of feminism more like just a self-interested political bloc. Like, they're just acting as women collectivizing for the interests of women. But then you start seeing them get into contentious issues, and they just take the most grisly position you possibly could on it. Here, I'll pull it up. I'll pull up an example here. Let me find it here. Oh, hang on. Let me catch up on my comments here. As for the situation with the woman either breeding with invaders or keeping to create problems for us, what would actually be the optimal move? Well, the optimal move would be you need to eliminate democracy as soon as possible. If we're talking about the group, like how the group should act, they should be looking to, like, what's the fastest pathway to eliminating democracy and establishing a dictatorship? And here's the crazy part. It doesn't matter which side actually gets the dictatorship, because in the end, they always evolve towards a patriarchal system, just because of the nature of how these states work. The only reason why we have not naturally evolved to a patriarchal system is because women are able to interfere with the logic of the state through their ability to vote. And because women can vote, they have artificial power that they would not have if a state was just functioning on the basis of which groups pose a greater threat to me and which groups are more necessary for my state's survival. And obviously, if we're talking a state like China or Vietnam or any other dictatorship, they're naturally going to understand that men are both the greatest potential threat internally to them if they're unsatisfied with the condition of things, and they're also the ones they rely on to maintain the system and to maintain the government and to enforce the borders of the state and to police the state internally. All of that is done by men. So you can piss off women a lot more than you can piss off men without there being serious consequences. And all these states would naturally understand that at some level. So the sooner that you can establish a dictatorship, the sooner that you can actually start rolling back these woman-dominated systems. You know, and another benefit of dictatorship is that they can just strip the legal positions of, for example, all these judges. Like, there's all these women judges in the United States and in Europe that are allowing for horrendous shit to happen to the local population. It's like, well, if you're a dictatorship, all that you have to do if you're in control of the executive is just arrest these people and bring them out back and shoot them. And just replace them with people that'll do what you want them to do. That's the beauty of executive power. You know? So in the end, that's all that matters, is abolishing democracy. On the individual level, obviously, that's a completely different story. You know, you just gotta... Collective action really is self-sacrificial. You know, you lose personally from collective action. So... how did dictatorship actually fix this? Why wouldn't they be as hostile? China also has this issue with women. Well, I just explained why. It's because the natural tendency will drift towards the interests of men out of necessity. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to become ultra-based patriarchs overnight. It's a natural shift towards patriarchy. And China's actually a good example of this. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to work, right? So in China, for example, the woman situation there partially is of their own creation due to the gender ratio imbalance at birth, the excess males at birth. So partially it's a problem that they created for themselves. But also it's there's only so many ways that they can pressure women to do what they want. But if you actually look at what China's doing, they are putting substantially more pressure on women than any Western country could. Because all we can rely on is incentives. We cannot coerce. Okay, women in our countries will never be coerced into having children, whereas in China, they are actually imposing penalties on women. Right? Anyways. Brother, my mama aborted 5 of my siblings. It's such an Eastern European tale. It's like, bro, are you black or are you Eastern European? Oh, that's brutal. That's brutal. The removal of Hilux is the only thing that would work. Dude, whenever I'm in public and I just see people engaging in normalcy around me, like just gratuitous acts of normal foid behavior, or even just normal fag behavior, I always come back to thinking about that. I think that's what, Gnosticism, where it's the Hilux, the psychics, and the and there's the third position, which is the numismatics or something like that, or I don't know, I forget the name. But I always end up thinking like that. Like, there is such a thing. And that's another thing that I realized, is that when I was working at that place that had all the druggies around, and they were just, like, literally their entire lives exist. You'll see these, like, prostitutes. And some of them will even be quite young. And some of them, I've seen tall blonde ones, too. And I'm like, could you imagine being born as, like, a 5'9" or 5'10", like, lithe, long-legged blonde woman with blue eyes, and you end up becoming like a literal crack whore that's selling herself for $20, $30 a pop in order to buy crack cocaine and also fentanyl to spend the rest of your waking existence stoned off your mind. Like, could you imagine? And it's like, when I see these people and I realize Aristotle was 100% right about that there's some people that are just natural slaves. Some people just don't deserve to be free because and it's not even, it's for their own good, you know? And this was actually one of the arguments that Christians used to defend the institution of slavery. Like, for example, in the South, is that they would use Aristotle and they would talk about how some people, just by their lack of reason, are natural slaves. And, well, I wouldn't argue that institutional slavery, obviously I'm not making an argument for institutional slavery. I think that that's a correct statement. There are a lot of people that literally would be better off if they did not have their freedom, if their freedom was taken from them. Right? And yeah, fumbled the genetic bag is exactly what I thought. I was like, what the fuck? It's even worse because, like, you see this chick and you're like, okay, if I was warped into this dumb bitch's body, I would know exactly how to become like a millionaire just through like choosing to do certain things. And it's like, you're born with this. I'm trying to think of is there even a male equivalent that you could, like, maybe being born as like a millionaire or something, or being born with a multi-million-dollar trust fund and then you blow it all on drugs, I guess. Maybe. I don't know. The more you ask Coca to do something, the more obstinate he gets. Yeah, I'm just like, whatever. I was a little bit annoyed about that stream because I thought I did a pretty good job on it. I was, and it was a long one too. It was several hours. I was tired by the end of it. But yeah, nothing ever came of it. You know, pretty privileged, aka smoke show. I wouldn't say she was really that pretty. I would say that she was like a Becky, maybe like a 5.5 in the face. But she was tall, she was blonde. If she wasn't a retard or whatever, I mean, it's, you know, oh, I was surprise snuggled and therefore now I'm a drug addict, whatever. You know, if she wasn't one of those, she easily could have parlayed that into something. But yeah, no, Mercer, you would have married me and become a trad whale. I'll become the greatest merchant navier ever. I don't think so. I wouldn't want to be fat. Well, I don't know. Maybe if I was a foid, I would. But the problem is that when you understand how much of an SMV hit fatness gives women, like, it really is probably the single biggest looksman you could possibly have as a woman. I don't know why any woman wants to or actively remains fat, knowing this. It's actually one of the white pills of a widespread use of Ozempic and these other weight loss drugs, is that it will actually make the dating market easier for men in general, because like thin women as of right now are a premium. Like if you're a woman and you're thin, you're already baseline 6 out of 10. You're already baseline above average just by being thin. No other characteristics. So if you take away the obesity looks min from women, that would reduce the SMV of thin women back down to a 5. And that makes it easier for every other guy, right? Now, it doesn't mean it will be objectively easy, but it will be easier. Anyways. Chinese women are desperate to have white kids. The Asian kids tend to look much more Asian than white. I don't know. I mean, I keep hearing about that. And look, I have seen some pretty... There was that one story. I didn't save it because I just I find these kind of stories rather disgusting. But there was this one white guy who allegedly was... he got, like, expelled from a university for screwing a lot of the girls in the university. And he was in China or something. He was a foreign exchange student in China. I'm like, I fucking hate these people so much because, like, what these guys are doing. First of all, they're destroying our reputation, right, in these countries, which will immediately make it so that we will have a much harder time getting a respectable woman if we do decide to go to these countries. That's the first thing. The second thing is that this is just, like, you're just spreading degeneracy in these countries, right? Like, these girls, I'm not saying that they would necessarily all be trad wives, but you've just enabled them becoming total degenerates. You know, like, most of these women presumably would be expected to get married at some point. You're just sort of defiling some guy's future wife. Like, there's something I just find reprehensible about that. And yeah, as I said, there's just, like, this just makes us look really disgusting as a population. Like, and you're ruining it, as I said, you're ruining it for guys who would just maybe want to go and, I don't know, find, like, some leftover woman who's 27 or whatever, you know, and the guy himself is just some kind of, like, incel or near cell. And he just wants to have, like, some kind of happy life. And these kind of guys that are doing this shit are ruining it for all of these guys. Because first of all, they're destroying our reputation. And second of all, like, destroying our reputation in the eyes of the women, and also destroying our reputation in the eyes of their families. Because now they perceive us as behaving that way as a group. This is why I was like when I would talk with black guys, I would warn them about how the stereotypes that they're getting associated with due to pornography will actually backfire on them if they're looking for respectable women, right? Because, like, you'll end up in a situation where any non-black woman, but especially a white woman, let's say, you know, even if she's married to, like, a Thomas Sowell or Clarence Thomas kind of black guy, or Ben Carson kind of black guy, who's like a neurosurgeon or a Supreme Court judge or whatever. Because of all the negative stereotypes we associate with white women and black men, she's immediately going to get smeared with that. And there's going to be a large number of reputation-sensitive women that will avoid that. And you've actually poisoned your own dating pool by creating these associations with pornography. You know, and I think the same could also happen with white men in these Asian countries where they're behaving atrociously, because it just creates a negative association. I heard a similar story like 3 years ago. White guy with glasses ran through multiple Chinese women in China during school. And I mean, it helps a lot if you're the only white guy in, like, if you go to some tier 2 city and you're the only white guy in the entire city of like 5 or 6 million people. It's like, yeah, at that point then you're going to have options, right? And so it's not even that I necessarily, like, I understand, especially if you're a guy who's never experienced that level of desire from women. I could understand why they would, like, I'm not saying I don't understand at all why they did it, but it's like knowing what they're doing. Like, if I knew that I would get that reaction from women in China, let's say, I would actually avoid going to China because I would not want to put myself in a situation where I engage in that behavior. Right? And then I also make it a lot worse for both white men and also Chinese men. And I create hatred towards white men from Chinese men that is justified. Right? That is justified on the basis of my behavior. Most women are reputation sensitive. It's just normalized to be a 304 now. Yeah, kind of, but not always, not everywhere, right? Like in China, it's not. In China, it's still fairly, I wouldn't say that they're conservative, but they're more conservative than we are, right? And it's the same in Vietnam, right? Vietnam is also the most conservative country in Southeast Asia. It's very similar to China in this regard. Anyways, this is something else I wanted to talk about because I got all these feminist Twitter posts on my feed. And I got shit like this, and it kind of blew my mind. So this is a woman...
So how did I...
So this is a woman who is allegedly the child of a rapist. Now, we know... I'm sure you guys were here from... I'm sure you guys were here for when the Block Your Rapist meme came about, where all these women who were claiming to have been surprise snuggled, when they were asked to block the man that allegedly surprise snuggled them, they all refused to, because it turns out that it's probably bullshit in a lot of cases. So we don't know if that is the case with this particular woman, but I actually remember this woman from all the way back in the 2000s and 2010s. Like this, she's been sort of a poster girl for the babies born, conceived and born of this act, right? In either the actual act itself or what the woman claims is that, which could be something as simple as I got really drunk and then I regretted it afterwards. Right? We don't know which one it is. But what's crazy is that when I was reading this post from this woman, and it's, look at this, 146K views, 10K likes. And it says, this woman is a good example of why you should abort your Earpist's children. She clearly inherited her father's Earpist mentality because she cannot even comprehend the concept of having empathy for her own mother. Dude, could you imagine being born of this and these people basically hate you for existing, and you have to internalize that your entire life? And then this is the empathetic gender, right? That's what really irritated me about this, is that these are the women that are supposed to be, they understand other people's perspectives, they can empathize, but they're completely vicious when it comes to things that don't directly agree with them. Obviously, they are very hostile to men, and they also want to abort as many children as possible. That's the reason why they came against the woman on that surrogacy thing. It literally came down to a child could have been aborted and was not. That's what they're upset about. Ultimately, it doesn't even really matter what the principle is. It's, can we abort more children or less? Right? Anyways, it's just like, I'm not a master of empathy, right? Like, I'm not a very empathetic person. I'm good at cognitive empathy. I'm good at putting myself in people's shoes and imagining how I would think and feel about something if I was facing the same situation as them. I'm good at that, but I'm not good at the actual emotional part of, like, the active feeling of someone else's emotions. Okay, I am very good at the cognitive empathy part. But even then, I can understand, like, I could put myself in this woman's shoes, that, like, if I was conceived in this fashion and my mother wanted to kill me at birth, but the legal system refused to allow her to do this, so I was allowed to exist as a person in the world because the legal system prevented my mother from killing me. And then I encounter all these people, these feminists, who wish that I was dead and wish that I was aborted, and make their entire careers on ensuring that people like me can never come into existence, even though I myself did nothing wrong personally. Like, that's actually kind of horrifying. You know, and it's, I have a hard, I struggle, I try not to, I don't want to become somebody who's anti-woman in a visceral way, but I can't help but feel like most of this shit is just fake. And I know that it's glib, and I know all of our guys in our sphere say this, like, they're full of shit. And I suspect that that's the case, but I want to try and give benefit of the doubt. But it's like, holy fucking hell, man. And then if you scroll down, it gets worse. This insect cannot even conceptualize the fact that she as a fetus was not even sentient. Okay, I'm not going to get into the pro-life versus pro-choice thing concerning sentience, but the bottom line is that a fetus, if it's allowed to exist in the mother's womb, will inevitably become conscious and sentient. So it's not even that it is currently thinking like a fully grown human. It's that the natural process will result in it. Therefore, it's functionally the same thing, because it's naturally going to become that anyways, you know? And they don't use that logic when it comes to a post-birth abortion or like killing a baby at birth or shortly after birth, because it's less aware than a 5-year-old child, let's say. You know, they don't use that logic then. So it's, anyways. Yeah, it's like she doesn't regret not getting an abortion now. She had no choice but to rationalize her situation. And dude, they fucking love it. They love it. Look at this. I was just getting this shit on my timeline, and I was just, I don't know what to say, man. Like, it's a good thing that here's the thing that men have that women do not. Okay? Women have this very cognitive or very intuitively biased relations-based morality, where it's about how an individual feels about something, positively or negatively. They don't really, like, for women, the concept of rules that apply whether they feel good or not, or whether they make people happy or not. The idea of there being a set of rules that are universally applied no matter how you feel about them is completely alien to them. It's completely alien to their conception. So if you say if you say that this is how we define a living person and they have a right to exist, whether the circumstances of their conception were morally acceptable or not, and whether the mother feels horrible or feels wonderful or anything in between about the conception and birth of this child, we're defining life at this characteristic, this point, and we will not permit the termination of this pregnancy. For a lot of women, this sort of rules-based morality is completely horrifying to them. They just can't understand it, and it outrages them. You know? If it's brown, get it out is my policy. You know, there's a lot of people that when Roe v. Wade was struck down, there was actually a subset of right-wingers that were like, this is bad because it's going to reduce the abortions that certain demographics would get in America. And ironically, they're correct, because what happened is that the conservative states that anti-abortion laws were immediately passed to eliminate the legality of abortion in the states, mostly in the South. Those are like the most black plurality states in the United States. Whereas the really white states in the North, those were the ones, like there was just recently a state that passed, I think it was abortion up to the date of childbirth. And this is another thing that's crazy about the United States. If you look at Europe is allegedly so much more progressive and so much more liberal than America. If you look at abortion laws in Europe, I think it's like all restricted to the first trimester for legality of abortion. And they do not allow surrogacy either. Surrogacy is illegal. Abortion is restricted to the first trimester. And in America, it's just a political football that's used by the left and the right. So now you have a complete ban in the Republican states, and then up to the 9th month in the Democrat liberal states. It's complete insanity. Foids want abortions because having babies means responsibility, which is kryptonite for slags. Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's, well, you know what? You see this line being drawn with abortion, with divorce, where women will say that they wanted a divorce, or they wanted to liberalize divorce laws because women were being treated so poorly, and that there was so much abuse within marriages that we need to make it easier for women to exit marriages. When you actually look at the consequence, if you look at, first of all, it's like 70% of women file for divorce. If you look at the actual reasons given for divorce, overwhelmingly, it's just irreconcilable differences. That's all. Like it's something like over 90% of cases or something. And a minority of cases involve adultery. And they're not all men either. Like men, I think, are somewhat more likely than women to have an allegation of adultery. But it's not like a huge difference. It's like 55-45 or something like that. And then if you look at abortion, it's the exact same thing. Like, what do you hear about abortion? You hear about, we need to be able to, like, what happens if a girl is raped by her own father or something, and she has both an inbred incest and rape baby that she's conceiving? Are you saying that she has to carry it to term? And then when you actually look at the percentages of abortions, like the reasons given for abortions, it's like 97% are just elective. They just didn't want to have a child at that time, right? And it's like less than 2% are for rape as it's defined. You know, again, we don't know whether that is like she was pulled down in a dark alleyway and then shit happened to her, or it's I got drunk and then I regret it. We don't know what version of ERP it is, but yeah. Sweden is the only country in Europe with an abortion term over 17 months. Over 17 months? Swedes have children, they carry children for 17 months? What the fuck? Surrogacy bad if the people who are going to parent the kid would be a normal family. Well, no, the issue is the commercialization of it, right? So it's like, if you're paying a woman to incubate your child for you, again, this is actually a perfect case that happened, where if you have a child that is incubating in a woman and there's some issue with the child, first of all, do you have a right, because you're treating the child as basically a product, right? So if the product turns out to be defective, like in this case, the child has a heart condition, you want to abort it, and the woman refuses. Okay, well, if you have it in the surrogacy contract that if she refuses to abort, you're going to sue her. Well, that's basically coercion. That's economic coercion in order to impose a serious surgery and potentially psychologically damaging surgery on the woman. Like, it becomes an unenforceable contract, is what I'm saying. So it's really like a legal issue. I think this is completely different when we're talking about contractual surrogacy, where it's like, for example, like I remember reading the early days of surrogacy when it was starting. It was like a woman's womb is non-functional, so her sister carries the baby and gives birth to it. Even though it's like her egg, it's her sister's egg and her sister's husband's sperm, but the sister carries the baby to term and gives birth to it because her sister has a problem with her womb or something. Like, and that's sort of an altruistic surrogacy, right? That's very different, right? What I'm talking about is the commercial, where it's contractual basically, and it's a service. That's the kind of surrogacy that's the issue. Let's see here. Somebody said something here. Planned Parenthood only reduces white babies. BW love to have kids in Gibbs. Well, actually, I mean, they do, but if you actually look at the abortion rates, they're pretty catastrophic for blacks. I think it's like 4 or 5 times as likely a black woman is going to get an abortion versus a white woman. I believe that there was actually, I remember reading about this when I was looking into this myself. If Margaret Sanger had not come on the scene when she did and really aggressively promote contraception and abortion to black women, there would be something like there'd be like twice as many blacks in the U.S. than there are now. So in terms of what their policy was, they achieved their goals. Now, conservatives will post about this and say this is a catastrophe for black people. White nationalists will say Margaret Sanger saved America or whatever. Obviously, if I was black, it would be like, well, who's getting the abortions? Like what like the way I would think about it if I was black is like, is it like college? Is it like higher educated, high IQ black women that are getting the abortions, or is it like the Shaniquas that are getting the abortions? Unfortunately, actually, we know who's getting the abortions. It's more so the slightly more intelligent. It's like the upper half, not the lower half. So it's probably contributed to their IQ going down in America over the last couple decades. And so you'll take the fetus to use in satanic rituals and eat it, drain adrenochrome. Well, that's what they do with circumcision. They use the circumcised skin in because they're stem cells in foreskin. They'll use those for I think it was like eye cream or something. And I'm not even fucking joking. That's what they use it for. Anyways. Isn't Planned Parenthood also weaponizing troons to some extent? Maybe. That's possible. I think the troon thing is on its way out, though. There was something else I wanted to say, but it slipped my mind. Let me see if I can find it, actually. Hold on. Oh, yeah, this is another one. So this is not related to what I was talking about. And again, there's not really much news coming out of Iran, but it just made me laugh. So U.S. servicemen in the Persian Gulf have scribbled messages on the dust of an aircraft flap, per an image from the field sent to Trita Parsi. The messages include, be a good goy and do what Israel tells you to. Operation Epstein Fury. Peace deal number 64 incoming. All this for the Holy Land. I love Israel. I'm a good goyim. BB's Bucks. IY flock cameras. The U.S. serviceman adds, what people in the media don't understand as they compare past conflicts to this one is this operation has no morale behind it. That makes a world of difference to the service members deployed to this undesirable locations indefinitely. I remember saying exactly this. Remember? I talked about this. The huge problem that America has is not that their technical capacity is insufficient. It's that there's zero morale for fighting this war. They've created a situation where not only is joining the military, there's no real dignity in it as a soldier. You're actively humiliated and emasculated in the military culture itself with how they treat like military wives basically being whores as something not only to accept as a norm but to joke about. Like, well, if that's the situation that if this is the morale and the culture that you've established for your military soldiers, why would anybody be proud of serving this country's military in any way other than just using it as a means of acquiring a paycheck and escaping the wage cage through claiming disability or some bullshit? Like, there's no way. This is the big problem that they have. There's no way they could justify a ground invasion because they would need a draft. They would have to draft Americans, and that would be a total catastrophe. And they would need to draft a substantial number, too. They would need about 2 million people at least. It would actually be quite a bit more than what they needed in Vietnam, right? Because Iran is a completely different beast. And Vietnam was a huge disruption politically, despite it only being a relatively small number of actual draftees. I think it was only like 2% of U.S. soldiers were drafted, or something like that. Like, you would need a higher percent if we're talking about the fighting age male population. You would need a higher percent in order to seriously contend with Iran. It's not going to happen. Look who we have here. It's Tails. Oh, I was waiting for you, man. Anyways. Basically having the same effect of people not having kids until they're ready at 30 or whatever. Abortion has a natural effect of lowering the IQ of the population over time. It depends. There is some truth to that. It depends on who's having the abortion, right? Like, there's a subset of the population that is too low IQ and too high time preference to even care about who is conceiving children. Like, you will have women that are just too dumb to even bother getting an abortion. And that you could say that there's maybe a selection effect there. Though I think, the thing is, you hear this, and then of course there's the incentives with the welfare state. But I mean, if you look at South Africa, for example, like, the average IQ in South Africa is like, if we're excluding whites and coloreds, if we're just looking at the black South African population, is like 75 or 78 or something like that. Like, it's pretty damn low. And in spite of that, they have a below replacement fertility rate. And blacks make up like 80% of the population, or 85% of the population total. So it's mostly blacks that have the below replacement rate. Obviously, probably they're higher than the non-black population in terms of children. But still, they've experienced a drastic lowering in their fertility rate, despite their average IQ not being very high. And I think that's because, just like, when you take away the welfare state incentives, that dissolves on itself. And you start seeing them actually go in and prevent births of their own free will, even if they're not that intelligent. And you also see this across the rest of the third world. You see this in Southeast Asia. You see this in Latin America. Birth rates are going down consistently globally. Anyways. In what world does incentivizing military wives to be whores improve everything? Due to the military regulations, soldiers are by default EFD, even if the wife admits to cheating. It's not. Well, this is the same problem that we run into with fertility. When you have a democratic state, you cannot impose anything. You cannot coerce women in any way. It doesn't matter how justified you think you are. You are not permitted to do so, period. And as a consequence, women are able to behave in whatever way they like. And what are you going to do? Like, are you going to punish them for adultery? This violates the sort of American fundamental values, right? So it's not going to happen. Not unless there's a dictatorship. And this is another thing. Okay, in a lot of Latin American countries, they have a history of military coups and government takeovers and juntas. If you look at America, it has had a tradition of civilian government pretty much from the foundation. You could make the argument that the war between the North and the South was an interruption, but even then, the civilian government still controlled the militaries, even though the military was very particularly strongly influential in the South. Like, there's never been a case in American history of a coup, a military coup of the civilian government. So it's always going to operate that way in America. You're never going to get around that, which is why I'm so pessimistic about the long-term outcomes of America. This stuff about posting Epstein Fury. Okay, that's pretty funny. And yeah, the morale is completely gone. BB's cucks. That's funny. But ultimately, that's not really like the only thing we could hope for. And it's kind of interesting because you've seen a few cases of J.D. Vance hinting about doing something about the U.S. dollar. And I think I've explained how the U.S. dollar has worked before, right? Where, let me actually find this here. J.D. Vance. Here we are. Vance. Let's see. I'm pulling it up now. Okay. Let's listen to this. So, I'm going to mute myself for a moment.
That's exactly right. And by the way, I'm this is like maybe super heterodox. I am not sure that I think the reserve currency is actually good for the United States of America. I think there is a good argument that reserve currency status is akin to coal in Appalachia. It's a resource curse, right? It allows your consumers to consume very cheaply, right? That's been the story of the American economy for the last 15 or so years. Even before that, is we can just borrow basically in an unlimited way because we have the reserve currency. That's exactly right. And by the way, I am.
Okay, he is actually right about this. Like, I think I have gone on streams where I've explained this before, right? Like how the American system works. And I've used a reference to a pretty good game called Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, where it's more so the lore behind it, the World of Darkness lore behind that game. And the idea is, like, if you turn into a vampire, every other organ in your body withers away, except for your stomach, which becomes this pulsating, engorged with blood, and you even sweat blood, and your saliva is replaced with blood. Like every fluid in your body is replaced with blood, in the way that story works. And that's kind of how the American system works, where because of the U.S. reserve currency status, this gives American financial systems complete hegemony over the rest of the world. Like, everybody knows that the U.S. is the ultimate bottom line when it comes to financial decisions about the world. So that means that U.S. financial institutions are always going to be seen as a safe haven. And the U.S. dollar has this artificial strength to it that allows the banks to borrow to a far greater extent than they otherwise could. The downside to this is that this causes attrition in every other sector of your economy other than finance. And so this is where you see the decline of manufacturing, because it becomes the strong currency means you cannot compete with other countries in terms of manufacturing goods. And your own government, your own economic system does not want you to compete with them because they want a net outflow of US dollars into the global economy to circulate through the global economy and to keep up with the expansion of the global economy. Right, if the global economy grows 5% in a year, that means that they need 5% more US dollars in their system in order to facilitate transactions. Okay? And that means that the US dollar deficit, the trade deficit, is actually an essential component to the American economic system. If they were to end that system, they could revive all these other sectors of their economy. And as a matter of fact, America could very quickly still once again become one of the richest countries on earth. But the problem is they would lose, first of all, this enormous power, this enormous coercive power they have that does not directly rely on military, which is the ability to lock countries out of the global financial system dominated by the US dollar. And also to freeze their assets if they so desire, and to inflict tremendous economic pain on them. That is a weapon that they've had that does not require them to wield the military, right? Which means they can allow the military to turn into what it is now, which is a massively overpriced money laundering setup, basically. That's what the U.S. military is, right? Like, they make extremely expensive, fancy-looking toys that don't actually function for their military purpose, right? Like Iran, with less than 1% of the U.S.'s military budget, is currently defeating the U.S. in its defensive war, which is unbelievable, unimaginable, right? Because Iran kept up with the pace of change, technological change in warfare, and the U.S. did not. But the U.S. didn't need to, because they've relied on this financial domination of the world since, since the end of World War II, yes. Well, after Bretton Woods, after Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard, U.S. dollar, even though that was more of a formality by that point. And gold was, I don't know. Should I get into why gold is not a good currency for a medium of exchange? Maybe I will. I mean, we're running a bit into overtime, but I don't really have anything planned, so I might as well just keep going. So the reason why gold is bad for the world reserve currency status, or even just any national currency, the reason why gold always ends up causing problems is because it has an intrinsic value to it, and it's a scarce resource. It's always in competition with the growth of the actual economy. Okay, so like if your economy is growing at 5% per year, your gold supply remains fixed, and if it has if it already has intrinsic value as gold, and then you add additional value onto it by minting it as the official currency, investors are going to face a dilemma where they can either invest in the economy growing at a certain percentage, or they can invest in gold, which is in competition with economic growth for their investment. Because gold is a guaranteed investment. It's a material asset. It's not a speculative investment. So in many cases, it makes more sense to buy gold and hold on to gold than it is to invest money into economic ventures in the economy. And this is extremely problematic when there is economic recessions. Because if there's a recession, or depression, that means that the economy is shrinking. At that point, there is no reason to put any money into the real economy. At that point, then, you just want to hold on to your gold, because currently any money that's put into the economy is contracting in value, whereas gold is either retaining its value or it's expanding its value. So you always run into this problem with gold. You need to be able to have a currency that you can expand to meet the size of to meet economic growth, and to prevent investors from simply sitting on gold instead of reinvesting it into the global economy or into the national economy, like whatever economy we're describing. That's a huge problem with gold. And this was the problem that the U.S. was running into in the 70s. And obviously it was exacerbated by the oil crisis. But that's why Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. Because by the 1970s, the entire world, outside of the economically segregated Soviet Union, the entire world was doing business with the U.S. It was almost like how Spain, if you ever look at colonial Spain, the way that their colonies worked is that they couldn't directly trade with each other. They would trade with Spain, and then Spain would basically be like a relay. So like if you're Cuba, you couldn't trade with the Dominican Republic, or Santo Domingo was the name of the colony. You couldn't trade with Santo Domingo. You had to go through Spain, and then from Spain to Santo Domingo. And it was extremely inefficient. But that's kind of like what happened with the U.S. in the sense that every country was going to be interacting economically with the U.S. dollar. And as a result, holding U.S. dollars, every other country had U.S. dollars because every country was trading with the U.S. So the U.S. dollar itself became a store of value and became a source of value. Because you knew that if you transacted in U.S. dollars, you could use them with other countries, because every other country also had a U.S. dollar stockpile for trading with the U.S. And you could also trade directly with the U.S. You could buy U.S. bonds with those U.S. dollars, for example. So it became this system. By the time that the gold standard was replaced in the 1970s, it was already basically eliminating a formality, which was the formal ability to convert U.S. dollars into gold, that had already effectively been abandoned in practice. Yeah. So, anyways, that's why the system came into place, and people assumed that the U.S. was going to remain this reasonable arbiter and this liberal. Like the assumption was, America is always going to push towards more liberalism and human rights and all this bullshit. That's what the rest of the world assumed, that we're always going to be nudging towards liberalism, but it was tolerable compared to the Soviet Union, which was advocating for communism, right? So they thought, well, having the Americans as a hegemon is probably not going to be bad because they'll leave us alone as long as we demonstrate that we are good allies against communism. And then communism fell. And once communism fell, that counter threat that the Soviet Union represented disappeared. And then the American system has sort of been it's like a ratchet. It's like it's ratcheting up in only one direction, right? There's no counterbalance now with the Soviets to counterbalance American irrationality in terms of how extreme their ideology gets. So they've just been getting more and more and more extreme. And because there's no pushback, well, this is what we get. Anyways, that was a quick breakdown of... obviously, it's more complicated than that, but that's sort of a simple walkthrough of why we don't use gold anymore and what the American system is. You know, because all these countries, it's, you know, I've used in the past, I've used Spain and Vietnam and Australia as an example. Instead of Australia sending Australian dollars to Vietnam in exchange for rice from Vietnam, they both use US dollars so that Vietnam doesn't have to keep a liquidity pool of Vietnamese dong with Australian dollars. They just, like, every country just has a liquidity pairing with their own currency in the US dollar. And because liquidity is so deep with the US dollar, you never have to worry about issues like liquidity lockups. Are there US conscripts in Iran? Will there be in Iraq or such? You mentioned 2%. Well, there's none right now because they haven't done any conscription yet, but just give it some time. Do I subscribe to Keynesian economics? I mean, well, Keynesian economics is more so about spending into, like, if you borrow against the future to publicly spend through a deficit, you can counterbalance, or you can counterbalance a recession by publicly borrowing money and spending during the Depression on, like, public works and shit. Just to put it very simply. And that's basically the idea of Keynesianism, is borrowing from the future to finance the present, with the assumption that the economic growth generated from borrowing that money will eventually pay off the borrowed money that was borrowed from the future. Which is effectively how we ended up in the total disaster of our pension system as it exists now. So no, I'm not a Keynesian, because Keynesianism is particularly about borrowing from the future to finance the present. And that is something that I would say this is the single most disastrous thing that we've ever done. Obviously, there's the economic crisis that boomer pensions cause. But then on top of that, there's the moral hazard that gets created. Like, the reason why boomers don't give a shit about what happens to the rest of us, even their own grandchildren, is because they know their pension is getting paid either way. Whether it's getting paid by their grandsons through their grandson's paycheck or through some other random guy's paycheck. They know that it's coming out of someone's paycheck. They don't really have to care too much about what their own kids are doing financially and economically, because they're not going to be relying on their own kids individually. And this is also why Islam is opposed to house insurance and opposed to other forms of insurance. And this is very intelligent factor, or very intelligent aspect of Islam, is that if you allow insurance, this allows individuals to remove themselves from the community. Because, for example, in a traditional society, if your house burned down, let's say your house was struck by lightning and burned down, well, you'd have to rely on the community to help you rebuild your house. right? And it would be more, and in order to do that, you would have to maintain strong bonds to your community. Whereas if you just have insurance that you pay in, well, the insurance covers it. You don't have to, it doesn't matter what happens to your community. You can be completely alienated from it and be a complete hermit and misanthrope towards your own community. And you don't have to worry about, like, the police will take care of any security issues. Insurance will take care of any disasters that could happen. And it just allows people to separate entirely from their communities. It's something Islam is very opposed to, and I have to say I 100% agree with them in theory. You could say in practice this wouldn't work for a modern economic system, but we're just talking about the cultural side effect of it, right? How do you expand the supply of money if you don't borrow? Do you just print money / give away loans at zero interest? Well, I mean, if you're a central bank that's government owned and you're lending the government money, well, who's getting the insurance, or who's getting the interest payments from the government? The government is paying itself interest at that point. Like, it's effectively a game that they play. So ultimately what happens is, okay, let's say that you need to expand the monetary supply. In theory, you could, like, abolish taxes if you, just by borrowing money or creating money, you don't even have to borrow it. You could, in theory, create money to finance whatever public expenditures you need, as long as the economic growth that is generated from your public and private sector is able to keep up with the increase in the supply of money. As long as you can maintain that, in theory, you wouldn't even need taxes. Obviously, in practice, like, taxes are more of a formality in the current system. If you actually look at, like, pretty much all of our countries at this point are deficit spending, right? Like, they spend far more in entitlements than they're ever taking in taxes. And basically the entitlements are unpayable with taxes. But the idea, again, is that you expand the monetary supply. As long as the economic growth keeps up with the monetary expansion, you don't get inflation. That's the theory. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but that's the way that the current monetary system works. So really, you could, and again, they do play games with, like, oh, I'm borrowing money, tee-hee, wink, wink, nod, nod. Yeah, I'm borrowing the money. I'll pay it back one day. But in practice, that's not how it works. In practice, it's just, we predict that the U.S. economy in 20 years will expand by this amount, like whatever, let's say 2% compounding. Actually, I'm gonna check that. Let's do 2% compounding. 1.02 times 1.02. Okay, so if you were to do 20 years at 2% economic growth compounding, after 20 years, your economy would be about 52% larger. And so if you were to say, okay, the public spending is going to be increased by 40%, it's projected to increase by 40% in the same time frame, well, therefore, the economic growth will outpace the public spending, and this will mean that the dollar will be strengthened compared to, if we're assuming that the public spending is coming from basically borrowing money into existence and then spending it by the government, right? So that's sort of the logic that they use. But taxes, the idea is taxes are basically this game that they play where they just pretend to, where they pretend that they're going to pay the debt off, and they pretend that the debt is real debt instead of just increasing, like, it's what the purpose of debt is for publics, like for the government, particularly the U.S. government. The purpose of debt is to expand the monetary supply and then inject that monetary supply into the global economy. That's the purpose of debt. Okay. And also to, like, one of the other things they do, like, if you look at the employment in the United States, I'm pretty sure that the number one employer now is either schools or hospitals in pretty much every state in the United States. And it's also true in Anglo countries generally, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. That's just recycling public money into the population. So what's happening is that our governments are borrowing money from themselves, paying public employees, which would be like healthcare workers. Those public employees then spend money on imported goods that, because we're like all this shit. Like I just bought a new battery for my phone. The battery came from China. This microphone that I'm talking in right now, it came from China, right? Like all this manufactured shit comes from China, right? So it's being imported, which means we're sending this currency that has just been recycled into our population. We're sending it out as a trade deficit. Okay. And in the US, it's most significant how this works because the US needs to export all these US dollars to the rest of the world, right? And in order to supply the rest of the world with US dollars for them to trade with each other, right? Anyways, Dark Pills posted a short. Who posted a short in the stream talk box about the morale problem? Oh yeah, I'll take a look. Also about insurance, what if the community is Islamic but in actuality would rather not help each other? That's what happened in my province with the Muslims here. Well, your province has insurance, don't they? Right? Like the societies we're talking about are basically pre-modern societies. They're societies that don't have these systems in place to begin with, right? The tech economy is slowly dying. Yeah, that's another one. That was one of the other things that they dumped a lot of money into. Because one of the other things America can do, like one of the economic organs that America can maintain is, or at least up until now, is the tech center. They can be, because of how top-heavy tech companies are, you don't have to worry about competing with the global labor force. Or for example, manufacturing. You don't have to worry about American manufacturing competing with global manufacturing you don't have to worry about that with tech the way you do with manufacturing. Because tech is, again, it's so top-heavy. They outsource pretty much everything that's below senior level, and then they insource seniors on H-1Bs and pay them less than they would anyways, right, for the work that they need to do. And then anything below a senior level, where they just need to be supervised and there's no legal liability for mistakes being made, they just outsource it, right? So they've been able to maintain that, and the only reason why they've been able to do that is because of how extremely efficient tech is at productivity per employee compared to pretty much every other industry, including white-collar industries as well, right? Nobody bothers because the big money comes from government and important people are all getting paid. Who cares about those in the private sector? Yeah. Technology is going to hit a stagnant point in 2030. Tech doesn't compete at a service level, but if you're a worker, you're competing against everyone due to the nature of remote work. Tech wagey hates life. Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's the reason why it's survived as an industry compared to pretty much every other industry, every other major industry that America lost. You know, the reason why tech has survived them is because of how extremely top-heavy it is. Right? Finance has survived because of how, I think because of all the legal requirements concerning money, and like where money gets parked, right? Like another major reason why first world countries, and quote unquote, are first world countries, especially compared to like Eastern European countries where the actual quality of infrastructure isn't really that different, is because we serve as these drop-off points for billionaires and multimillionaires to park their money. So like Anglo countries are especially notorious for this. Like we allow foreign billionaires and multimillionaires to buy up our properties and just park their money in our properties. Our property markets. And that's a much more safe environment to park money than most of these third world countries, like most of the countries of origins for these people. Right? They can reasonably expect that their principal will either at a minimum stay the same actual value or even increase in value compared to what they were if they were forced to put their money in the Chinese stock market, or God forbid the Indian stock market, right? Or any other assets outside of these countries. And this allows this asset inflation, and the profit made off of that asset inflation is what allows, like it's most stark in Canada, where we have the boomer class that is able to borrow against their enormous housing equity to live these luxurious retirement lives. And anybody who did not get on the property ladder is basically completely screwed. Right. Do you anticipate a big push for the AI, IPOs, and all the disruption caused by Chinese open source models causing a .com-like boom, but at a much larger scale? Look, they're going to try, I think. But the problem is, like, when you say that, a big push and the disruption, are you saying like that they're going to, the disruption will happen, or you're saying that they're going to attempt to clamp down on this by gatekeeping against Chinese models? Because I do believe that the problem is that the money's already invested, right? The money's already invested in these AI giants, and if they can't compete with Chinese models, the only thing that they could do is lock off access to them through legal means. But even then, I mean, there's ways around it. It's sort of similar to what they did with Chinese EVs and other Chinese products, where they would just route them through Mexico as a proxy because they were being tariffed directly from China. But other than that, I couldn't really tell you. Like, I don't know that much specifically about AI. I have sort of a top-level understanding of it. But do you think the disruption that will be caused by Chinese models will cause a giant pullout once they realize the cash? Oh yeah, no, 100%. This is actually going to be what happens. Because at this point now, the money's already gone. That's the problem. The money's already gone. So what are you going to do at this point? Like, the only thing that they can do is intensely gatekeep, which is, for example, what they've done with Elon Musk's electric vehicles, right? So this could actually be the beginning of the end for them. There was a really good article that I was reading on that, but fuck, I forgot where it is. I'm going to have to clock it out in a minute here, so, because it's approaching 3 hours. Why is listening to what's happening in Romania important for Westerners? This is what's going to happen in your country, or has already happened. Well, it pretty much has already happened, whatever's happened in Romania. So, sorry, brother. Anyways, I'm going to clock it out at this time. It's great for you guys to come along. It's unfortunate that it's been such a boring week, other than that guy self-deleting, but we were able to talk about some stuff. So, yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.